who the donors are behind them, decided to put on the ballot for this November an advisory measure.
Well, before we get to that, let's break it down into what has happened, who the targets are of the JROTC, and what are the outcomes. Because one of the things that we're hearing, I've heard from some people I've even had guests on the program, that it gives minority kids a chance. So we want to hear very clearly what your position is and why.
Well, let me start with giving even further background on JROTC. As Riva has already stated,
Thanks, Marco.
It was started 90 years ago with the advent of World War I, and it was implemented to basically create a greater number of officers to handle the influx of draftees of enlisted infantry soldiers getting sent off to fight the First World War, and the program has fluctuated in size depending on what wars are being conducted. It increases with World War II, with the Vietnam War, and more currently the current U.S. war on terror. We've recently heard that the Bush administration has actually doubled the funding for JROTC, even despite the constant budget cuts that are happening right now. And we have heard a lot of rhetoric from the pro-JROTC forces stating that it's a way out for at-risk youth, et cetera, that 90% of JROTC cadets are students of color. And they may post this as something innocuous, but if you look at the reality of it, there's an economic draft happening in the United States, and most of the poor people in the United States are people of color. So it's actually a reflection of this economic draft that 90% of students are students of color, and that 70% of the instructors are African American. It just shows that there is a large pool, there is a disproportionate targeted recruitment of people of color that's happening within the military.
And I'm very happy that you explain that, because the old voluntary army has got that same disproportionate balance to it, and we're seeing the numbers of young people that are dying. Riva, what inspired you to get involved in the anti-V campaign? I like to know where people's heart is coming from and why.
You asked a good question. You have no idea what my answer is going to be yet.
Right.
It's kind of interesting, actually. I've been an anti-war activist my whole life. But in November '06, when the school board took the vote, my daughter happened to be a high school senior at the time and happened to be the student who presented the petitions to the school board with the 800 names of students against JROTC. It was public. She was on TV. She got hate mail and threats and sexual threats on her Facebook as a result. So it became very personal. I was there when she presented. I was the proud mother. But all of a sudden, it's like my daughter was targeted because she was presenting a position in public. So she went off to college, and I carried her torch, frankly. It just became very personal to me that, again, as you were saying, they're talking about this program as developing leadership. And what we realized is the leadership they're developing are people who make threats to people who present opinions in public.
Riva, you also have a long history of community activism. As a matter of fact, you were chair of the KPFA board, and that station is known for its outspokenness on many community issues. As a matter of fact, I did some town hall broadcasts having to do with the Navy and Hunters Point some time back, and other things. Marco, you're also a well-known activist, because I remember meeting you, and I was on the steering committee for Answer, and you've been an activist with Answer for a long time. What inspired you on the Prop V campaign? anti?
There's plenty of reasons for me to be involved in Prop V. Originally, I went to high school in Washington High in Fremont, not the one here in San Francisco. And even though we didn't have a JROTC program in our school, and surprisingly enough, the Fremont Unified School District is largely white and middle class, just so people know. But we did have students who enlisted into the military for my school. And actually, a student that I knew from my history class died in Anbar Province in 2004. So I'm all familiar with how a lot of students are recruited into the military and in fact and know what it feels like to experience that sense of loss when someone dies so suddenly. And it accumulated with all the work that I've been doing right now. I'm also, in addition to Answer, I'm also part of this youth group called Pro People Youth, KMB, which stands for Kabataang Makabayan. It's Tagalog for Pro People Youth. It's a youth group that tries to deepen people's political consciousness by tying in international issues with local ones, specifically with the national liberation struggle in the Philippines, and tying in how United States imperialism and U.S. foreign policy relates to domestic policies here at home. And part of the work that we do is actually counter recruitment and education to give youth alternatives to being in the military as well. We've actually done media literacy training programs and other recruitment military education programs where we teach people about the realities of the military. And in fact, some of our members are actually were in branches of the military service themselves.
I look back at your history and I look back at your involvement because I am very familiar with Answer. And, I look at people that were standing against this war when everybody was pro this war. Mm-hmm. This was a war that at that time was looking for weapons of mass destruction, was looking for bin Laden, and it was going to be a pretty swift war. And we lost a lot of young people. And maybe, I shouldn't say maybe, but unnecessarily, because it wasn't accurate what the target was and what they were doing, so it had other means. So this brings us back to your subject of anti Prop V. And I think it's very, very important that we get an understanding, because now this country has spent $700 billion on a war that people have identified as unnecessary. Part of our foreign policy has gone away because torture has been tied to this country. And Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo, and even you're starting to see the federal courts starting to turn some of these things around. So I want to get back to your subject directly, but I'm just trying to get a context. And, bravo that you're doing what you're doing. So.
Well, if I could jump in on what Marco said about sort of this economic draft. Mm-hmm. I also want to talk about that 90% figure, that 90% of the students in JROTC are students of color. 90% of San Francisco Unified School District students are students of color because of white flight. Okay? Right. So actually the percentage of students of color in JROTC is the same as the percentage of the schools, public schools in general. Now, they try to pitch JROTC as a leadership opportunity school, but guess what? It's not in the private schools where there are the white kids who do have economic opportunities.
That's interesting. You're saying that it is basically public school based. Am I accurate in that assumption?
In San Francisco, it is public school based, absolutely. So the way we see, and I just want to address some of the myths in terms of JROTC.
Please.
So what the proponents of the program say is that it's not recruitment, okay? And what we quote now is